Could your daily routine be full of hormone disruptors? There are more than 1,000 hormone disruptors living rent-free in our environment right now. In our food, our water, the air we breathe, the clothes we wear, our skincare, they all mess with our hormones. The good news is we don't have to suffer through it anymore because now we have Hormone Harmony, a formula made only with herbal ingredients that are shown to reduce hormonal symptoms of women of all ages. Since I've been using Hormone Harmony, I have felt more balanced, and other women feel the same way. The biggest benefit, they say, is feeling like myself again. That's what women mention over and over in their reviews, and there are over 30,000 reviews for Hormone Harmony. For a limited time, you can get 15% off your entire first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code DATEABLE at checkout. That's happymammoth.com and use the code DATEABLE for 15% off today.
Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Krafchick.
We're active daters turned dating insiders.
Here to dive into everything modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to Dateable. Hello, friends.
Welcome back to another episode of Dateable.
I've slept for like 36 hours straight, Julie. I don't know about you. After a week's worth of events in San Francisco, I'm so dead.
I know. I am too. I feel like that was the most upbeat I've been in days. The welcome back to another episode of Dateable. How to put it on.
I know. I'm like, if only people knew how antisocial I am.
You know, it's been a whirlwind. Obviously, it's been amazing. You know, everyone's like, what are you all doing for your book tour? And we didn't really know. And all of a sudden, a lot of things that we've been working on started to come together all at once, which has been great. So we've been doing a lot of SF, LA, back and forth now for a couple weeks. Like February has been the month of doing all this.
It's been nonstop. And every event has been very different. And we actually did that kind of on purpose because we didn't want them to feel too similar. Like you can go to multiple events and still get something new out of them. But I think that's partly why I'm so tired, because we've like exhausted our full range of topics.
No, it's been so much fun. We had, for anyone that missed it or hasn't heard us talk about it, we had 3 events. I feel like we had more because we did like additional sightings and stuff too. But we had 3 main events that we did. So we did one at the space on Union Street in San Francisco, Neon. I think that one was like maybe the most like show-like and celebratory because we had a cake. Our friend Nikki made us a Dateable book cake, which was incredible. You could see all the photos on Instagram, but she does this a lot, like for like some of our friends' kids' birthdays. She'll make like these really fancy cakes. Like it's a hobby for her. So I was like, hey, would you mind doing one for our book? And she was all about it. And it was pretty impressive. So we did our show. We had a lot of audience participation, which was really fun. We had a game where people guessed some of the dating terms and the definitions from the book. And then we brought people up for different dating conundrums, which we'll actually devote entire brunch talk to. So listen, because that was just so interesting and insightful what came out of that.
And then on Saturday, we went to Marin for a book event at Book Passage. Definitely a different audience there because it being Marin, but different topics came up. And we also saw a different group of friends that came out for that. But the grand finale was really at Manny's on Tuesday night in the Mission. I've never been to that space before. It's incredible. It feels so intimate and it draws a pretty intellectual crowd that was very much willing to ask questions and have discussions. And we filled the house.
It was great. They kept bringing out more and more seats. It was amazing. And also want to shout out Dr. Marie Tuid, who was our incredible moderator. She did 2 of the events. She did the Book Passage one in Marin and then also Manny's on Tuesday. And it's funny because like we had the same conversation and it was the same moderator, but they felt like totally different conversations at the same time. Yeah. So it was really great. She's incredible. If you haven't listened to the episode we did with her about compersion, we'll link it in this episode in the show notes, but you should definitely check that out as well. She's such a fascinating person.
And we got to meet so many of you.
Yes.
How fun was that. And thank you to Courtney and Steven for coming out to 2 events, repeat audience members, and for one, Courtney for keeping score at the one in Neon. He was a great scorekeeper. And then Steven brought his book out to the second event at Manny's for us to sign. So fun seeing repeated listeners.
And it was really fun when I was like, I know this person from the Facebook group. Like, I can recognize their photo. Like, Courtney, immediately, I never met him before. Immediately when he came in, and Camille, too, I recognized them. Like right off the bat. So I thought that was super fun. And we had a lot of people come up after and introduce themselves and say they were in the Facebook group. So again, thank you for all that came out. It was so incredible to meet you. Thank you to all of our friends that supported us too. It was really good to see. I think like everyone came through at some point throughout this whole time. And I don't know, I kind of longed for the days that we were all like doing all this stuff together all the time. It was great to have you back in San Francisco. But even like my friends, I see them often, but not like in this type of capacity anymore. So it was really like brought me back to the good old days.
It kind of felt like some sort of wedding at the in some ways. I know, Julie, this is like no way in comparison to the wedding you're about to have, but it was a lot of like managing different guests and friends who were there and coordinating where we're going after the event. And it was just a lot of coordinating, but it was so worth it because we got to see a bunch of our friends in one place. Yeah. And then I also want to just recognize a longtime listener, Langston. We've known you since the beginning, like since 2016. Langston started listening. I had no idea you were still listening. I had no idea you were listening so intently. And thank you for coming out to the event and for getting dinner with us afterwards.
He like came up to my fiance. He knew everything.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved it. I think also just want to give a shout out to your friend Billy, who is also my friend. Love Billy. But he threw us an incredible after party on Friday too. So we had, it was just like, it was a fun night. It was like we did the show, which the show was super upbeat and a lot of energy. And then we went to dinner nearby with like a huge group that also became like a celebration of one of our friends. Her birthday was in this like upcoming week. So we kind of used it as like a double excuse to celebrate her birthday. And then we went on to the club where Billy, your friend Billy, got us a table, and you know, the bottle girls came out with like the sign. He was going to say like, congrats, Julie and UA, but it was on Valentine's Day. And he figured everyone would assume we're just a couple.
Which people do anyway. Who cares? Like, I was like, sure, let's just have a sign that says congrats, Julie and UA. But the Hawthorne is the place. Okay, Billy loves Hawthorne. We went there for Julie's birthday too as an after party. Billy loves this place because we can get a nice table there. Bottle girls come out with the signs. Funny because Julie's partner has never been to a club or has never been to that club in particular.
He has like in college, but like he's not a club goer at all, at all. So anti. He loves music, but not that type of music.
Yeah. So he came out and it was so fun having him there.
Sport.
Because I knew he wasn't going to like the whole experience, but I knew he would like the sign. I think he was impressed by the sign. The sign is pretty fun.
You know, he did good. We were there for like an hour and a half, a solid hour and a half, but we're old now and we're not club people, but great time.
He's a good sport. It was fun. And I was dead the next day. I mean, like the next day, so Julie invited me and another friend of ours, Louise, to do a catering session for her upcoming wedding. So we got to taste incredible food, but it was like a whole day adventure after getting home at 3:30 the night before. I hadn't stayed out like that maybe in like 5 years.
No, I left at 12 and that's super late for me. Like I can't anymore. But you rolled up and like in your sunglasses and you just looked dead. It was funny because there was a conversation about being vulnerable at the book passage event. And you was like, I'm going to be vulnerable right now. I'm hungover as fuck.
You know what? Well, I wore the sunglasses because I think I'm allergic to alcohol now. My eyes were so swollen the next morning, and they hadn't been swollen like that since the last time I drank. Yeah, that's where I am now in my life. I'm totally allergic to alcohol.
We're old. It's okay, though.
It's good. The good type of old. I will lean into it.
I know. I was very impressed that we were out at least when we were out. It was still impressive, although wasn't quite to your your time. But when we left, I'm like, yeah, she's staying till the end because you were staying at Billy's place. I'm like, there's no way you're leaving early. There's no way.
Yes.
I'm like, don't sleep through this appointment tomorrow.
Yeah,
you made it. You were there.
I did.
My favorite, though, is when we were at Manny's, you walk in with your suitcase because you were leaving from there. I'm like, oh, my other half is here. And then you went and like put away your suitcase. Then my partner came and I was like, oh, my other half is here.
Yeah, So she's like introducing us to the organizer of the event. And I walked in, she's like, oh, my other half is here. And I was like, am I the other half or am I the other third? I'm not sure.
Oh, but on a very exciting note, I also asked Yue to be the officiant of our wedding. So
Yes!
I'm so happy that you're going to be doing that. It means so much, and I know it's going to be incredible.
And I learned that when you're ordained for life. There is no expiration date.
Yeah. You were like, oh, shit. Should I look into this?
Yeah, no, I'm ordained for life. Anybody else who wants to get married, I'm yours. I will officiate your wedding.
Love it. This has been a wild ride. I think I'm ready to like just chill a little in March. I don't know how people tour all the time. I mean, I think it's a lifestyle, clearly, but it's really fun and it definitely has made me want to do it more. So I think we've enjoyed it.
Oh, thoroughly enjoyed it. Just seeing your faces and actually getting to meet you and meeting people who've already read the book or they're starting on the book. It's been really fun. And hearing that it's been resonating with you just means everything to us.
I mean, no surprise here, but those audiobook listeners are just going right through it. You know?
Right, exactly.
Awesome. Well, again, all good things. We're going to talk a little more too on a brunch talk that will be out on this Sunday. So we had this really great example that came up on the show of someone that was like, should I text them? Should I not? And we want to like elaborate further on it because I think it's so relatable to so many people. So stay tuned for that. And we're really excited for this episode that we have today with Allie Jackson of the podcast Finding Mr. Height. We were able to go on her podcast that she does or did with Erica Spera. She's leaving the podcast to pursue more of her comedy outside of the dating topic. So we have Allie that's joining us, but it was really fun being on their podcast and then also having Allie on ours.
And we're just kind of talking about those relationships, you know, like the almost relationships, the situationships, and how they are pretty important in our dating process too, and how they feed into the actual relationships that you end up having.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, those were all so painful in the moment where they never went anywhere. But I think looking back, at least on my history, I can see how they all served their purpose. Like they all brought me closer. And if I look back on things that I thought were like so real in the moment, I can see how like the next thing actually progressed. And it was really hard in that moment when it wasn't working out because I had this narrative like, this is kind of the best I'm going to have. You know, will I ever find someone that's as good as this person? And then the next person was always better, you know, until I met that person that I was like, nope, this is it. This is good, you know? So I think it's easy to think that when you're in the situation, but once you have some time and space, it like all becomes a lot more clear of just what was meant to be and what wasn't.
Yeah, they're building blocks for learning. And without those, you may not have the learnings for your eventual actual relationships. And Allie talks about this in our interview where she gives some really great examples of why these relationships were beneficial for her, as long as we learn from them and just don't let them tear us down every time.
Yeah, and Allie's podcast, what I love about it is she really gives the play-by-play update, or she did, because now she's in a relationship, but she gave like the play-by-play of all of her dates. So it was almost like you were watching a friend go through it real time. But through that, like it really helped her get to where she is now. And we do a lot of reflecting back in this episode also. And I relate to her because we're both fellow dreamers. We have the tendencies to, you know, think things maybe are more than they are in the moment. Also at the same time, have so much love to give and don't want to like lose that. That's so wonderful in the right relationship.
Yeah, she and Julie are like pretty much the same type of dater. Both of them could relate so hard to each other. It was so funny because when we were on theirs, Erica and I were the exact same. And then you and Allie were the
soulmates.
We're like, wait, we're twinsies in so many ways. But I think so many of you will find this relatable, especially if you're someone who tends to romanticize relationships before they become that and kind of get ahead of yourself, or you find yourself trying to pull back because you have a pattern of getting ahead of yourself. This will be a really useful conversation to listen to because you'll kind of hear how Allie course corrected through those moments.
Definitely. Yeah. Like really for anyone that's in the thick of dating right now, this is a must. And if you're out of it, another opportunity to reflect of how far you've come as well.
Because we all have come so far. One of my favorite things about doing these events is we get to reflect on our 10 years of doing this podcast. And I feel like this question comes up almost at every event. What have you learned the most in those 10 years? And reflecting back, I'm proud of us for what we've learned. And also we had to learn and go through those moments to get to where we are today.
I think writing the whole book really gave me a lot of perspective of just the patterns I had and how far I've come, because while it's in your head, I feel like putting it on paper and writing it and, tying everything together, I'm just like, oh my God, this made so much sense why things weren't going the way I wanted them to at certain parts of my life. And like, obviously hindsight is 2020. You need those experiences to get there. But I think it's just it's a way to remember, even if you're not where you want to be, you will get there eventually. When we look at like all of our friends, it's like eventually everyone gets to the place they need to go. It's just different roads and, paths that you take to get there. And there's no timeline. There's no like right way to do things anymore. And yeah, it's just trusting that like all these past experiences are serving you ultimately.
Yeah. And there's really no destination. It's about having the tools to navigate every obstacle and situation that is thrown at you and learning from the process, and not so much like I must get from A to B because, the B is unpredictable.
I think, it's funny because I was like talking to my partner about like just all of our events, and he was like, UA had some really interesting perspectives. I don't know, not woo-woo you are, but a little like, I don't know what the right word is. Spiritual,
I want to
maybe.
Say spiritual. Yeah, there's a little spirituality I'm trying to lean into.
Maybe that's the right way. But I really think, part of it's like I talk to you all the time. So sometimes when you haven't heard as much, and he admittedly doesn't listen to the podcast as much now that he's around with me 24/7. Yeah. I think the breakup for you really gave you like a depth and re-understanding. I think that was a pivotal point looking at your journey of just like how you look at things differently now that maybe wasn't there even prior to that.
Yes, it really reset everything. And we can discuss this more in the brunch talk too, because I think having all these different perspectives and also listening to you, our listeners, just gives us a more holistic picture of relationships and why we're even dating in the first place.
Definitely.
It's given me a lot more clarity and, direction.
And if you want even more clarity, of course, go pick up the book, How to Be Dateable. If you haven't by now, you are missing out. There is a real fear of missing out that's happening. FOMO to the finest. So everyone's talking about it. Everyone's reading it. Time to get on the same page and do it as well. Howtobedateable.com.
Yeah, literally get on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we get into it, at Dateable Podcast, that's where we're at. Follow along for all the recaps of all these events. We're also trying to plan a New York City trip soon in the next couple months. So if you live in New York and you have bookstores or event spaces or social clubs or anything that you think would be great for a talk, definitely send us a DM or reach out at hello@dateablepodcast, and we'll also keep you updated when that trip happens. I also need to get out there to meet my new nephew that I still haven't met. That was born in December. So I need to get out there. ASAP.
We're doing it. We're going to make this trip happen.
And anywhere else too. Love some of the emails we're coming through. And then obviously, like, the more we get in a certain area, that will prioritize where we go next. But again, we kind of did this as a trial run to see if, one, we enjoyed doing it, if it resonated. And I think the answer is yes and yes. So we'll look to do more and more of this type of stuff. Okay, well, before we get into it with Allie, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
Let's be honest. We all stress about our relationships sometimes, right? But what if those thoughts take over your life and you feel this deep need to do something about them? Maybe this drives you to constantly check for signs that your relationship's okay, ask for reassurance from your partner or loved ones, or compare your relationship to others. These can be signs of relationship OCD, a type of obsessive compulsive disorder that focuses on your relationships. Now, not every therapist understands OCD or is qualified to treat it effectively, which can make it difficult to find the right kind of help. And that's where NoCD comes in. With NoCD, you can do virtual therapy with a licensed therapist who specializes in treating all types of OCD. They can teach you how to set those fears and doubts aside so that you can enjoy your relationship and your life. To find out more about therapy with NoCD, go to nocd.com and book a free 15-minute call with their team. That's nocd.com to learn more and book a free call. Trust me, it's worth your time to talk to someone who can uncover what's really going on and help you get your life back.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Okay, let's hear it from Allie from Finding Mr. Height.
We are so happy to have you on our show, Allie from Finding Mr. Height. Thank you for being on Dateable as we talk about from situationships to relationships.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pumped to be here.
And your cat, too.
Oh, yeah.
And my cat.
It's a duo episode.
If I try to keep him out of the recording studio, he will just make more noise. So it is just generally better to let him do his thing.
Well, I remember just seeing you on TikTok a lot, like come up in my feed and just like how relatable you were of just like going through it, like in the trenches of dating. When did you start doing TikToks? Like, was it pandemic?
2020. Yeah.
Okay.
Like in the fall of 2020. I was posting on Instagram. I decided to make 2020 like in January before we knew everything was happening. I decided to make 2020 my year of dating accountability.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Of course.
Obviously. That
in a different way. Yeah.
And it worked out.
It did. So I basically started posting on Instagram being like, you know, I'm going to go on these dates, and people started becoming invested. And I at first was doing it in my close friend story on my like regular Instagram account. And I then realized like I have all these random people following me. I'm adding them to my close friends, mostly so my coworkers don't see. And so that's when I made it its own account and then started posting on TikTok in the fall of 2020.
So what was dating like for you then? Like what kind of, I mean, obviously the accountability, but what inspired like, I'm going to actually be more accountable?
I really just wanted something to keep me motivated because I was finding that I was dealing with a lot of almost relationships or like first dates that I thought went really well that never materialized into second dates. And I was just becoming really discouraged by dating, and it didn't feel fun. And it didn't feel like something that was going anywhere. And I wanted it to feel fun again. And when I started posting about it and started talking about the dates I was going on, it started to feel fun. Not only because I was like, had something to look forward to, which was like talking to my friends about my dates at the time, my friends, but also because so many people were like, oh my God, that happened to me too.
Yeah.
That like camaraderie really kept me going.
Yes.
In a big way.
Did the people you went on dates with, did they know you were posting about them?
Not like when we matched, because at the time I was pretty much exclusively meeting people on dating apps. So I wouldn't tell them like before I even knew them, because in my mind it was like, if we went on a first date and I didn't want to go on a second date, it doesn't matter. Like, it's none of their business that I post about these things because everything is anonymous. Like, I was posting like nothing about, you know, not their face or their real name or like anything like that, any identifying details at the time. So I'm like, if I went on one date with someone, he doesn't need to know. Like, that's
Right.
none of his business. So it was mostly on like second dates that I was then saying, hey, I'm doing this thing and, this is what it looks like and that kind of thing.
We love how you give like all your dates nicknames, like the disco ball and your current boyfriend Skyline.
Oh, the
and I
disco
feel like
ball.
that's so known for you. But I think obviously privacy, I can see why you do the nicknames. But
Yes.
we see daters do this all the time, even if they're not
Oh, yeah.
posting in a public way. It's like a way to identify with your friend because you're like, who's Eric? Like, I'm going to forget that name. But the disco ball, of course, I remember that. Like, how did you come up with them?
It's funny because I was never a nickname person.
Okay.
Like before having the account and wanting to do it for privacy purposes, I was not like my friends knew who I was dating by name. Like I was never somebody who did that until I used to write a blog, like literally WordPress words.
OG
back when
blog.
people actually
Yeah.
wrote things. Yeah. And so I would do nicknames there again for privacy. But before that, I never did it. And I don't know, it just felt like obviously I didn't want to use their real name.
Yeah.
And I also didn't want to give them a fake name because I thought I would get confused.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So like if I'm dating, Eric and I start calling him John to my Instagram followers, I'm like, I will get confused. I will accidentally call him John.
Yeah.
Like, we can't be having that.
On the date.
Yeah, on the date. Exactly. So I'm like, I have to come up with a nickname that is so ridiculous that I would never call someone the disco ball to their face.
Right. But did Disco Ball ever find out they were a disco ball?
Oh, yeah, he helped me pick it.
All right.
Okay. So, yeah, how do you pick them?
Yeah.
Like, how do you come up with them? Because we have a friend that's very creative and I love seeing her thought process. And again, she's not doing it in like a public way. It's just for her and her friend. She sent us literally in a document explaining how she came up with all of her nicknames.
Oh, that is so funny. I didn't have like a one size fits all approach for how I did it. I would kind of think about, did anything stick out to me? Sometimes I would do it before I even went out with them. I stopped doing it after a while because it was just getting annoying to me to like make nicknames for people that maybe we never ended up going out.
Yeah.
Or like, it would just make me more upset. But like sometimes it would be about something that they do. Like I called one guy the rower because he used to row. Like that one's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Skyline's nickname though came because the very first night that we met, he had just moved to the city, literally like was still sleeping on someone's couch looking for an apartment. And I was telling him that my favorite view of New York, I think the Manhattan Bridge is really underrated. People talk about the Brooklyn Bridge all day long.
Yeah.
I think the Manhattan Bridge is where it's at because you can see the Brooklyn Bridge with the skyline in the background. It's my favorite. And I see it. That's my route back to my apartment from Manhattan back into Brooklyn. So I was in an Uber back from meeting him for the first time. And I took a picture on my phone of my favorite view and I sent it to him, thinking that I had sent him this like gorgeous skyline picture. And in the morning I went back to review the picture and it was just like colored dots. Like as we were moving, like
blurry.
it was terrible. Blurry, yeah. It was like fully blurry, like one of those like color bright things that you get for a child.
Oh my God.
Like
He's like,
terrible.
thanks.
He's like, are you high or what?
Yeah, right. And like he's like very sweet. He didn't say anything at the time. He was like, "Oh, it's great. So pretty." So that's why he's Skyline.
Got it.
Do you think anybody's ever had a nickname for you? I think about that a lot.
Oh, probably.
Like, what was I to them?
I mean, I'm sure I've been TikTok girl to a lot of people.
Oh my God.
Oh,
I
yeah,
bet.
yeah,
I bet.
yeah.
Right? Or
That's
like
true.
something related to that.
Yeah.
Do you guys think people have had nicknames for you? Have you ever found out that someone did?
I wish I had asked. I guess I can still ask. I should ask some of the people I've been on dates with.
love
I feel
to
because
ask
I was a
people.
dance instructor, so I'm sure
Yeah.
that was it. Like the dancer chick.
Yep.
Do you think guys do it as much?
Yes.
You do?
I think they do it more.
Okay.
I think so, but I think more like what you said, Yue, that's like, oh, the dancer chick. Like
Yeah.
not
Yes.
an
Yes.
official nickname.
Nothing
Yeah.
clever. Nothing clever. Right?
No, I think it's more like, oh, that girl who danced or, that
Yes.
person who did this thing. I think it's more like that.
Something really straightforward.
Yes.
Like if I were to date now, it's probably like the podcaster or the
Right.
But then everyone's a podcaster. So how do they differentiate the podcasters?
Not everyone meets a ton of podcasters.
Okay.
Maybe in
Well,
LA.
Everyone we know is a podcaster,
Yeah.
but I don't think that's true for the general
Logan
public.
has a podcast. The damn cat has a podcast. Everyone has a
Literally
podcast.
everyone.
That's true.
How many dates do you think you've been on? Like, have you counted?
No, I have not. I wish that I was keeping better track back when I was like going on a lot. Do you guys know how many dates you've been on?
I mean, I think I estimated because one of UA's friends came on the podcast. What'd she say? 900 dates?
Yeah.
I did back of the envelope math and I kind of estimated like probably like 500 dates.
Wow.
But this was like in my life, not like in like a 1 year.
Even when I was at my height of going on dates. I don't think there was a year that I went on a date a week on average. Like, I don't think there was a year that I went on 50 first dates even. Maybe, but I don't think so. Even let's say there was a year that I went on 50 dates, 900 would take a lot of years.
Yeah.
She was going on like multiple a day.
She's double booking.
Oh, she was an energizer.
Yeah.
She was definitely an energizer.
You have a date tracker, right? You use Notion? Is that what?
Yeah, I use
I think
Notion.
I saw that. Yeah, tell us
Yeah,
about
I
it.
love Notion. I put everything in Notion. My whole life is in Notion, and thus my dates went in there as well.
Not sponsored by Notion, but should be.
So
Now, I wish.
what would you track in the date tracker?
I tracked, there were like 2 attributes. So there was like where we met high level, so like dating app in real life. And then there was a more specific one. So like if it was a dating app, which dating app was it? If it was in real life or like at an event, what kind of event was it? Was it a dating event? Was it, networking event, whatever? Where we went, what kind of date it was, like whether it was drinks, dinner, an activity, that kind of thing. And then I would tag the actual location just so that I can like keep track of places I've been and like want to go back to. And then what else? If we kissed,
Okay.
or more, and if how I felt about what I wanted to happen next.
Okay.
So it would be like, I want another date, or I'm not sure, or I don't want anything. And then I would also, obviously not for the most recent one, I have a boyfriend at the moment, but like how it ended, whether it was his decision, my decision, mutual, and then literally how it ended, whether it was a text message, a phone call, an in-person conversation.
How do you think having this Notion tracker of your dates has helped your dating life and hindered your dating life?
I think by the time I was doing it, I was very cognizant of not wanting it to make me feel like I was trying to gamify dating.
Okay.
I think if I had had something like this in my 20s, it would have very quickly turned into an obsession. Like, I jokingly say that I'm obsessed with Notion, but like it wasn't like the end all be all of like, oh, I need to get another entry in my Notion database, which I think if I'd been doing this in my 20s, it would have turned into that. I'd be like, oh, I got to build up my database. I got to get more data. I don't think it did that this time, but I do think it helped me because I was able, especially when we would do like our dating wrapped episodes of the podcast, I was able to go back and say like, okay, I did meet most of the people on dating apps and oh, interesting. Bumble led to most of my actual first dates and second dates.
It's good data.
Yeah, it was good data to be like, okay, I was on Bumble, Hinge, and Tinder for the most part. I also went on a couple dates from the league, but it was nice to look at and say, okay, Bumble feels the best to me anecdotally, and the data backs it up.
Yeah.
So I should be dedicating more of my time to Bumble because it's actually like bearing fruit for me.
I could see that, why that would be helpful. Was there anything else that you were able to like analyze or like see any other patterns?
Yeah.
I noticed there was one year where I noticed that I had cut things off with almost everyone, but I did notice like those types of patterns when I would go back and review of like, okay, am I giving people enough chances or not enough chances? Or like how many dates on average am I going with people before I decide that I don't want to see them again?
Yeah.
And like I could see myself going through different phases where I was trying to lean into different pieces of that. Like you guys talk about in your book of like, I'm a dreamer in your archetype. And I therefore tend to romanticize situations and give people more chances than they deserve.
Yeah.
Like that's my history. But then when I am thinking about that, sometimes I will like boomerang to the other end.
Yeah.
And I
could
will
see
cut
that.
people off too soon.
Course corrected.
Yeah. So like when I would review and I would be like, oh, wow, in the last 6 months, I've ended things with most people after one date. Interesting. Like maybe I should be giving people some more chances now. Maybe I've gone too far, you know?
That's really interesting. And I think, too, it doesn't always mean like I remember when I was dating before my current partner, like I was getting rejected, quote unquote, more than ever before. But that was because I was really just showing who I was. And it wasn't for everyone. And that's okay. But I wasn't trying to be like a dating chameleon that I was maybe in the past. So I think seeing the data is really interesting. But then also like how do you interpret it is another side of it, too.
Yeah. And I think seeing that I was pretty much exclusively I looked at it like halfway through 2023. And I realized that I had met every single person that I'd gone out with on a dating app. Even though I was going occasionally to speed dating or a singles mixer or, you know, that kind of thing. And I wanted that to change. And I don't think that I would have made that realization and actually implemented the change if I hadn't had the data like staring me in the face.
Like when you go to these events, like trying to make more conversation and move it along, or how do you mean?
Just
yeah.
going to more events.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I made a commitment in August of 2023. I decided I wanted to go to 2 in-person events a month.
Oh.
And they didn't have to be dating events.
Good.
But they had to be events where I wasn't going to know very many people. I could know 1 or 2 people, or I could bring a friend with me, but it had to be largely strangers. Also, I wanted one of them at least to be not dating, because I didn't want it to always feel so pressured.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like I was showing up and just scanning a room for who I could date.
Right.
Like that doesn't feel good either.
No.
That's good. This is exactly how a financial advisor would look at your investment portfolio at the end of the year, right? They're like,
Yes.
oh, a lot of your investments are in stocks. We can diversify a little bit. We can go into
diversify.
crypto. We can go into real estate. You're doing the same thing. You're like, okay, putting all my bets in apps. Maybe I can diversify into IRL dating.
Yeah.
So that is a good way to look at end year review of your distributions.
Yes.
Has Skyline seen your Notion?
No. He's seen his Notion page. He has access to his Notion page because we track our dates there. In Notion, you can like connect different databases, right? So like I have a database of like the men.
Love this. Yeah.
So like he is a page of the database of the men. I don't go to any of the other pages anymore, obviously, but like,
Yeah.
So when you go to a man's page, you can then see all of the dates you've been on with that person. And so like that's how I track my dates with him, because I still think that's really fun to do, to see all the things we've done. And I do that
love
about everything.
that.
I track everything I do is in Notion. So like my whole calendar is in there with like where I went and if I would go back there and what we ordered. And I'm like, oh, I'm a weirdo. I like that stuff.
I need to use Notion. My
I
dad
know.
loves Notion.
I was gonna love
Notion's
this.
so great.
I was gonna say I feel like I'm not an organized enough person for this, but I love it in theory. Like I really,
Yeah.
I'm like, I like that it can give you so much more insight, because you
Yes.
think that you have all this stuff in your head, but like seeing it on
You don't.
paper is you don't. Yeah.
And I also feel like seeing it made me realize that I was getting really burned out by dating, in part because I was feeling like dating apps were the only way that I could meet anyone. And I was struggling with the dating apps. I think a lot of people do. And I was also struggling with the fact that I felt like I didn't have any other good options.
Right.
And so starting to go to more in-person stuff really started to open my eyes that there is this whole world out there where I could be meeting people if I just like put as much energy into that as I do into other things in my life.
Right.
So you said you met your boyfriend at an in-person event. What was the event like, and like how did that meet go down?
So technically, he and I met at an event I threw the week prior, but I don't
okay.
remember meeting him.
Oh, okay.
So I throw an event pretty much every year, but this was the first one we'd done since COVID. But prior to that, we'd thrown it. This was the 13th one. We'd thrown it like 10 years in a row, 12 years in a row. It's a beer Olympics. It's a fundraiser for my volleyball team. My volleyball team travels all over the country. We go to tournaments and stuff, and we fundraise for it. So we throw this big event, and I run it. So I'm like, I have a microphone. I'm running around. I'm like yelling at people for breaking rules. I'm like,
You're in your own element.
I'm in my element. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a beer Olympics, so everyone is drinking except for we don't as the refs. So as you might imagine, I'm also getting really annoyed because I'm like totally sober and there's all these people like running around like crazy people breaking rules in beer Olympics. So he was there. We have a couple mutual friends, and one of our mutual friends invited him to be on his team. Apparently I yelled at him for a rule thing. I don't
Breaking
remember
the
this
rules.
at all.
You don't remember?
Yeah. And so, but what's interesting about it is that I do remember other guys that were there that were like more in my usual type, quote unquote. And I did not clock him at all, even though now I think he's like the most handsome person on the planet. That was interesting to me, that I was like, this is not somebody that I walked into that room and zeroed in on.
Right.
I still think the best people are the ones that are like in the corners that you don't aren't the ones
The
that
awkward ones, the awkward wallflowers.
I mean, I stand by that even on dating apps. Like the people without the shiny profiles are the best bets.
There you go. So that had happened. And then the following week, because I had been going to all of these events and trying to go to all of these events, I had started reaching out to people in my life that I knew through or went to stuff like that. Not just dating events, but like people who threw social mixers, people who like organized run clubs or book clubs or like whatever it is. And so I reached out to some acquaintances and I got invited to this like social mixer, not a dating thing, just a, hey, let's all get together as, you know, young professionals in New York and meet, whatever. I almost didn't go because I had an event for my high school, like a high school alumni thing beforehand. and I was tired and I just like didn't want to go. And I'm like, but I told her I was going to, and I told her I was going to post about it like on my account. She's trying to like get her business up and running. Like I have to go. So I went and I walked in and I saw another mutual friend who I did not know was going to be there, who was the guy that had been at my beer Olympics, and Skyline was in his group that night. So that's how we met.
But that was your first time meeting him.
Yes.
To you, in your mind.
To me.
Yes.
He knew who I was. I had no idea that I had met him the week before.
Like, how long have you two been together?
That was April 18th of last year. So it's been like 8.5 months.
Okay, so maybe this was my experience. I'm curious if you also had this, but like when I finally like met someone that was real, right? Like having that relationship that I'm like, okay, this is reciprocal, committed, like we're all in. It became much more abundantly clear that some of the people I thought in the past were just not nearly as serious that I had built them up to be. I'm curious if you had a similar experience, because we talked about when we did your podcast that we share dreamer tendencies. So I'm curious your take.
I think that's spot on, Julie. Like I knew from my past, like you brought up the disco ball. That's an example of a situationship sort of thing. I very much thought that we were headed for an exclusive relationship. Like I thought that it was obvious to everyone. That's where we were headed once he moved to New York. He lived in DC at the time. We met when he was still living in DC. We'd been visiting each other. I thought it was so abundantly clear that that was what was going to happen. And then it did not. And it was clear that that was never his intent. And looking back, I was like, there were signs that I chose to ignore. And I then, for the record, met several men after the disco ball before Skyline who were clearly very intentionally wanting to date me more seriously. Mm-hmm. But that I had no interest in dating more seriously. So, like, there was a guy I called the publicist. There was a guy I called Mr. Worldwide, both of whom were showing up really consistently, really good communication, like planning dates, like very clearly wanted to continue to see me. And in both of those situations, the publicist I dated for longer than Mr. Worldwide, but in both those situations, I was like, I just don't want to date these guys. Like, I have no interest in becoming exclusive with these people, but they're such good men. I'm like, am I broken? Do I only like that guy that's unavailable and making me chase him because it like feeds my anxious attachment? Like what's going on? And then I met Skyline and I immediately felt so secure while also being excited. And I think that's what I was at these two extremes previously where like with somebody like the disco ball or the rower, I was excited but anxious.
Yeah.
And then with somebody like the publicist or Mr. Worldwide, I was secure but bored. And Skyline was the first person that I had met in a very long time that fell in the middle of those two.
So we often talk about situationships from the receiving end, like the other person doesn't want to progress and you want it to go somewhere exclusively. But you're also presenting a different scenario, which is also situationship, where you're the one who's deciding whether you want to be exclusive with this person or not. And you are the one that decided you didn't want to move it into exclusivity. Was it helpful for you, though, to have the gray period to understand if you want to progress?
I think so, because I don't actually think I would call that a situationship. At least the way that I define a situationship, it's like obviously like not a real word, right? It's like the definition is subjective. But the way that I define it is that the ideal outcome of the thing is unclear over a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And you haven't communicated what you each want the ideal outcome to be. And so you might not be on the same page, but you actually don't know because you haven't actually talked about it. And it's going across a longer period of time. When I think about Mr. Worldwide and the publicist, it was more like we were still just dating.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'd been on 4, 5, maybe 6 dates. I think for me, at least, a situationship happens when one person is like, I'm ready to be exclusive with this person, but we haven't talked about it, or I'm scared to bring it up, or like, I don't know if they're on the same page as me, but I'm not going to be direct about it.
I agree with that. I think that it is important to like spell out this terminology because I think there's just dating.
Yeah.
And I think they all get muddled a lot. Like sometimes people are like, I don't want to lead someone on. It's like, well, you're dating. You have to just see if you like the person. Like it's okay to like go on dates and not be sure and just keep going. Like we expect that we're going to know immediately. And that is what we call the expectation of love on demand. And that's just not realistic. And then there's the almost relationship, the person maybe that you have dated like a month or two that isn't like in situationship territory to me, in my point of view, that like it's like
I agree.
That tipping point, like, are we going to do this or not? and then it just doesn't work out. And then there's situationship where it's been lingering for a long time. Maybe you even had conversations and the person is not ready to define it, and you stay in that gray zone for a very long time.
It's the difference in a situationship is when someone's already made a decision and the other one hasn't.
I think it's when you haven't talked about it, for me at least. And I think it's over a longer period of time.
Maybe it's when you want more. That's when it becomes a situationship and you're unsure of where you stand.
So could it be in a situation like this, like
I love
in
that we're
Allie's
debating
situation?
this, by the way.
No, I think this is very important. I think this is very important because some people like to self-diagnose themselves, in a way that's not serving them. So this is important to understand. Like in Allie's situation, could it be like Mr. Worldwide thought he was in a situationship, but you thought you were still dating?
I think it's
because
possible.
Things weren't expressed, right? You can be in a one-sided situationship.
That's true.
Possibly.
That's true.
I would guess that most people I was maybe in a situationship with, and these are like before the word became popular. I can look back at that now. I don't know if they would actually think they were in a situationship. Like there's one that I talk about all the time. It was my friend that wanted more, and then he pulled back on that and decided that he didn't. He just wanted like a friends with benefits. I would guess if I was to talk to him, he would not call what we were that. He would have said, I made it very clear that I was only looking for friends with benefits. But to me, because more feelings developed, I wanted it to be more. I think now I can look at that as a situationship.
And were you guys also doing things that felt more relationshipy, even though he was saying that that's not what he wanted?
I mean, I think looking back on it, I'm just like, oh my God, what was I doing? But that's another whole story. I think part of it was we were in a similar friend group, so we just saw each other a lot, but we weren't like going on dates, but we saw each other so frequently because of just the world we were in.
Yeah.
I think looking back on it, I'm like, no, there were no signs that this was going to relationship territory. But I think what you feel and what is reality isn't always the same. That's especially for the dreamers out there. So I don't think anyone has ever, like, we hear people too, like, oh, I was in a relationship with someone and then they went on like 4 dates with them. And we're like, is it?
Yeah.
So it's like everyone's terms are so different. Yeah. But at the same time, if that's your truth, that's your truth. And I think as time goes on, you can reflect and learn from it more.
Right. So, Allie, for Mr. Worldwide and Mr. Publicist, when they expressed that they wanted something more serious with you, is that when you ended things with them?
So they didn't. So that's why I don't think that we were in situationships, but they were. I could just tell based on the types of dates we were going on and the like way that things were building, particularly with Mr. Worldwide, that's where they wanted things to go.
I see.
And I was like, I don't want it to build any further.
So with the rower and disco ball, the ones that you said, like looking back, I can see these were actually more one-sided or not really real relationships. I think like for me, I was able to be like, wow, this person actually didn't really prioritize me at all, or they didn't really make efforts. Like, were you able to see anything that you're like, ooh, I would never stand for that now, knowing what I have?
Yeah, I think it was the prioritization thing consistently. So I think that like something that we do as dreamers is like we focus in on one thing that made us feel the way that we want to feel. And we ride on that and let ourselves ignore the things that don't fit. It's like confirmation bias, right? Like we see the thing that we want to be true, that maybe was true the one time, and then we let that be our prevailing thought about the situation as a whole, when like in reality, the day-to-day is not like that.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. It's like I had that one great date and then you're hanging on to that. And then it's not like...
Or the disco ball would like went on a trip with his mom and told her about me and my podcast. And like I had sent him a whole email. They went to Paris and I love Paris. And I had sent him a whole email of recommendations that I thought he would like. And he had forwarded it to her and she replied to me about it. And was like, so-and-so told me about you and your podcast. I would love to listen to it, blah, blah, blah. I rode that high for a long time.
Oh, man.
Well, I think family is an interesting one because we've talked about this before. Like people's like meeting the parents or introducing you or talking about it holds such different weights.
Yes.
Wasn't there a story, Yue, that you like sat next to someone's family?
My God. Yes. Mr. Tin Man. Tin Man was my nickname for him.
Because he had no soul.
Because he had no
Because he
heart.
had no heart. He had no heart. And we joked about it. We were like, you're so cold. You have no heart. Ha, Mr. Tin Man. But he invited me to a movie screening and sat me next to his dad. I don't think he purposely did. It was just I happened to sit next to his dad.
Wow.
And his dad's like, oh, I've heard about you. And then I was like, oh, as your future daughter-in-law? Is that how you heard about me? You know, in my head, I was like, should I ask for his hand in marriage now? So we had like a nice conversation. And after that night, I was like, this is it. Where he sealed the deal. Like, this is definitely going somewhere. And I think then he like ghosted me the next week or just didn't call me back. And then years later, he wrote me this long email that was like, I never was serious about you. It was never headed in that direction.
What? Why did he write you that?
This was like such a drawn out situationship. It was definitely a situationship. I was so convinced I was in love with him that I couldn't let him go. And he was always very clear that he wasn't there. Like we weren't at the same level. And it dragged on for years. And I finally kind of professed my love. It was like, you're it. You're the one for me. I want to be with you. And he ghosted me. And then after that happened, he wrote me an email to explain why he ghosted me, which it happened because my best friend went into his work and was like, why the fuck did you ghost Yue? So
oh my goodness.
So there was a little prompting.
It wasn't like a just randomly sent an email. Yeah.
No, he wasn't trying to be a good person. It was because my best friend threatened
He didn't want to
him.
keep getting harassed, basically.
Oh, wow.
He's like, let me shut this down.
I was like, this has got to stop.
Yeah. But that was so good to know, though. Getting that email, as much as it hurt, it was like, oh my gosh, I've been telling this story that was so not the truth. We were living on two different planets in that situationship.
Well, I think that's common, the living on two different planets. Like we have seen, like we've even done like recaps of dates for people, and just the two perspectives are always like so wildly different. And it's really interesting, like what we take away from a good date versus like what the other person might see. And a lot of times you just never get the answers. Did you ever have like one that like somehow you were able to be like, oh, this is what I thought and this is what they thought?
I went on a couple dates with this guy a couple of years ago. And on our first date, had like a good time. Was one of those like, yeah, I would see him again. Good conversation. Like, you know, nothing like mind blowing, but like, yeah, good date. I'll see him again. We went on a second date, had a good time again. We went axe throwing. It was super fun. We kissed at the end of the date. And then we just never texted each other. It was on our pod, we call it a MOO, a mutual opt-out. There wasn't really anything like pushing me to text him or anything. And clearly the same was true, I thought, from the other end. And, you know, whatever. Fine. Moved on with my life. 8 months, 9 months later, maybe, he texts me that, according to him, which I do not think is true, my recap of our second date came up on his FYP. He knew about my account, but for some reason, I guess had not looked at it.
Okay.
I don't know. And in the recap, I went back and I watched it again. In the recap, I say nothing bad about him. I say, like, I had a good time. We kissed at the end. Like, I'd like to see him again. You know, we'll see. And he sent me this, like, really long text about how he was so surprised to see that video because he didn't think that I was invested in seeing him again at all.
Interesting.
Oh.
And I'm like, buddy, we kissed at the end.
Yeah.
Like, you think I kiss people I don't like to want to see again? I used to, but not anymore. Not at 36. So like, that was really surprising to me because I fully thought, yeah, I guess, you know, I liked him, but not enough to like really push forward something.
Well, this is why we talk about the love crisis in our book, because if we live in this world where we're in our universe and the other person is their universe, and then we have all these assumptions, nothing gets done. The needle does not get moved in any direction because both people have their assumptions that keep them from moving forward. Like, I think in that scenario, if either one of you had texted, hey, I want to see you again.
Oh, we would have gone out.
Yeah, you would have gone out. But you both had stories for him, grand stories of how you didn't reciprocate. That's what prevented him from asking you on another date. We have this like offshoot podcast called The Exit Interview, where we interview people and a few of their past exes and flings and dates. And we ask, like, what went wrong or why did things end? And more times than not, the story is not congruent. It's just like one person thought one thing, the other person's like, oh, I didn't know she liked me, or I didn't know he wanted something more. It was a lot of, I didn't know. So I guess the lesson from all of these stories is like, we just have to tell the other person how we feel. Let them know.
Absolutely. And I think we often tell ourselves stories about things even before we've met someone. Like when I work with clients and we're looking at other people's dating app profiles, for example. And I'll do this program I have called Swipe With Me, where somebody will share their phone screen with me as they're using a dating app, and they talk out loud so that I can get an understanding of how they're thinking about people that they're looking at. The stories that we are telling ourselves about other people based on what we're reading, because of our own biases and things that have happened to us in the past, are wildly different from person to person.
We've seen it before too. Like we've seen people be like, what does it mean when someone says, I don't take life too seriously? And then on our Facebook group, like 100 different responses will come back.
Yeah.
And it's like, you could have just asked the person.
You could have asked. I don't know what it means. Ask them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're the one who wrote it.
I want to dive into this even more, but before we do, let's take a quick break to hear from our partners. So here's the part that I'm still like, I think everyone obviously has to find their balance, but we talked about earlier, like the signs that sometimes can be misconstrued. We hold on to that great first date or, meeting the parents or something that might not have as much impact that we think.
Yeah.
But of course, like we don't want people to just be like so jaded in the sense that nothing means anything. And I think obviously actions speak louder than words and patterns speak the loudest. But how for you as like someone that had dreamer tendencies that would get ahead of themselves, like how were you able to kind of like keep the magic and hope alive, but also be more realistic?
I think one thing that was really important for me to internalize is that for me, actions or words, neither one spoke louder. It was about those two things aligning. Because that's what was missing in a lot of prior, I'm going to use the word situations, but I don't mean like situationships, but like a lot of prior people that I dated.
Yeah.
The thing that was missing was their words and their actions. So like they are telling their mom about me and also wanting to ask me on another date. Like they are saying that they want to see this movie with me and then inviting me to do it. Like, or the other way, it could be that they are taking me on all of these dates and everything is great, but they're saying they're not ready for a relationship.
Yep.
And it's so easy to just, when you have words and actions that don't align, it's so easy to just pick the one that you like more.
Yeah. Yes.
Either their actions or their words, and just decide that that's the one that's the real one.
I like that better than the actions speak louder than words. I think it's dead on.
Because sometimes actions are misleading.
Totally. I've had situations where like someone's texting every day and like on it, and then it turns out like they just got out of like a marriage and I'm just becoming their like makeshift new girlfriend. And it's not because they actually like me, it's because that's what they're used to.
That was something that worried me a lot about Skyline, because he was very recently separated and is now divorced. And I was worried because actually in the situation with the rower, he had very recently broken off an engagement and had said that he was ready to move on. It had been, I think, a year maybe. I don't remember the timeline exactly. But he had said, I really want to move on. I'm like ready for a relationship, all this stuff early on. At some point in our dating, he realized that that wasn't the case, or maybe I just wasn't the right person, but never communicated that to me.
Yikes.
Whenever that shift happened. And so that was something that I was on red alert about with Skyline, and we had ad nauseum conversations about it in our early dating stages about whether he really felt like this was what he wanted, because that had happened.
But you can only do so much, right? I think for some people that when they feel ready, that is their reality, and it takes being in a relationship for them to realize that they're not ready. So there's also like, I think for both of you having the dreamer tendencies, I really look to you all to give me hope, because as a maverick, I'm like, this is not going to work out. Like he just got out of this relationship or he just got out of this marriage. I'm more on the practical side, but in some ways, like there needs to be the hope of it working out needs to outweigh it not working out.
Absolutely.
Right? It has to tip towards the positive.
I totally agree with you. And I think something that helps me is to remind myself of my resiliency, because protecting myself from getting hurt at all costs is not going to lead to good things, because that's going to mean that I'm not going to have any good experiences in all parts of my life. If I'm always worried about maybe getting hurt, it is highly unlikely that I'm going to experience anything cool.
I like that. I think we can only protect ourselves as much as we can, but we can't do it at the sacrifice of enjoying life and being present and doing things. And we do, again, going back to the love crisis, we just see a lot of people not even taking action, not getting into relationships with the fear of rejection, fear of hurt, fear of loss. But like you said, if we fear all of that, when we end up not participating in life, we just end up being protected in a bubble.
Yeah.
You don't learn anything in a bubble.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that having those conversations can do, regardless of what the topic is, maybe it's their most recent breakup, maybe it's something totally different. Can it fully prevent them realizing that they're not ready after all? Definitely not. But I do think that what it opened up for me in Skyline was him talking to me about how he was feeling about it. And him feeling more safe, if that had happened, to talk about it.
I think one thing that I learned is that, of course, we all make progress in, some of the things that we've had to overcome, but it's never like gone completely. Like, I think I made a lot of progress with anxiety and dating, but it will sneak up even in my relationship from time to time, usually not even prompted by anything my partner did. I'm curious for you, like, you said that you really fell into like the rom-com way, especially your dreamer mentality, and that held you back of getting ahead of yourself. What, I guess, have you overcome, but then also what still sneaks into your relationship even today?
I think one of the things that I overcame was the getting ahead of myself with the wrong people. Of like, I'm always going to be the person who romanticizes the future and like thinks about like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we got married? Like, that's always going to be me. And if I try to tamp that down, I'm just going to like dull my shine and make myself sad.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't want to do that. But I want to do that while also having a lens of what I actually know about this person and knowing that I'm being a like silly little dreamer girl right now. And like, that's cool. And I can do that. But that's what I'm doing right now. I'm being my little dreamer girl, and here are the things that I actually know about this person. So I'm not conflating the two as much as I used to, which I used to do a lot. The thing that still does sneak back in is feeling like if we're not at 100, then we're at 0.
I can relate to that.
Oh,
and like,
Julie.
Yeah.
Like, that's Julie.
And like, I felt it when you were talking to your partner about levels of excitement.
Yeah.
And like things like that. In early dating, there's always something new and exciting going on. You're like, there's so many firsts and, you're experiencing all this new stuff together and you're so excited to be in this relationship and everything is happy and rosy and amazing. And in a longer relationship, and mine's not even that long, 8 months, but like even now, some days are boring.
Right.
And like nothing bad happens, but nothing over the moon amazing happens either. And like, that's fine and normal.
Yeah. I'm curious if you've experienced this too, Ellie, because I think one thing for me was like when you're just dating, or even like I was in relationships, but they just weren't like to the level of my partnership. It wasn't a partnership. It was like, we're both doing life separately.
Yep.
In those ones, like I feel like it was either like we were on or it was off. There weren't like a ton of conversations. We didn't work through things. And I think for a long time, I kind of got over this a bit before this relationship, but I was like, oh, you can actually talk it through. And a conflict doesn't mean that it's over.
Yeah.
Like, has that been like a new experience, or did you not deal with that as much?
I've had some really high conflict relationships that are just not my norm, but were really, really high conflict. With Skyline, we don't really have conflict, like at all. And I think a lot of it, I've like been in my head about it sometimes because I'm like, man, like we don't ever disagree. Am I like holding back? Like, are there things that I'm upset about that I'm not saying? And I'm like, no, we're just kind of on the same page and occasionally don't share the same opinion. But I think, like you were saying, Julie, because we talk so much and we talk through our differences of opinion, it's never felt like a disagreement or a conflict if we ever don't have the same opinion about something.
I think the word conflict is like widely, because I feel the same way. It's like, I think I always thought like conflict was like fighting and yelling. And I think it really can just be misinterpretation or just navigating differences. And I think like it still could come 8 months. Obviously, there's time.
Oh, yeah,
but
absolutely.
I was like, I feel like it set in more for me like around month 6. Like the first 6 months were like conflict free. And then, but I think the thing with conflict was it always brought us closer at the end, even if it was uncomfortable in the moment. And again, it was never like screaming fights. I think it just changed my view on conflict for a positive instead of thinking like it's the end.
I like thinking about conflict as an opportunity to become closer. And Skyline and I have talked about when we do eventually argue about something, because like eventually we will, what we want it to look like and how we want to come back together, hopefully during, but also afterwards, and like what that looks like for each of us. And I'm hoping that will help when that eventuality happens. We shall see. Watch this space.
Well, kind of related to that, because I'm wondering, the ups and downs of your dating experience is what fed the beast of your podcast. I mean, it's like, it's your content. And now you're in this relationship where I sense this calmness from you. And you two have built scaffolding around how you manage and navigate conflict. Do you sometimes think about like, when is the other shoe going to drop? Like, is there uneasiness to that? Because now it's like steady and calm.
There was in the beginning. I definitely had a when is the other shoe going to drop mentality is just spot on for how I felt in the beginning of like, this feels too good to be true. He's showing up every time he says he's going to. His actions are matching all of his words. Like everything is the way I want it to be. And like the way that I've always envisioned that my partnership would look like. What's wrong here? Like something has to be wrong. There has to be a catch. And I felt that way for quite a while, several months. And I don't feel that way anymore. I've like worked through that. I'm like, he's been consistent enough that, you know, that's where I'm really happy that I am in therapy because I was able to bring those thoughts to her.
Yeah.
And not consistently to him.
Yeah.
Because I think eventually you can make a problem if you really want to.
Yes.
I think that is so relatable, though, to a lot of people that have been dating for a while and it hasn't worked out. I think sometimes it's hard to be like, is there actually someone out there that's going to, you know, be that person that I've wanted? Like we were talking about earlier, the balance of like excitement, but then also like, you know, consistency. And it's not just like one extreme or the other.
And I also thought a lot about, I know you were asking earlier, UA, about whether I was telling dates that I had, you know, my podcast, my TikTok, all that stuff. I know that my dating pool was smaller because of what I do. And like, I'm sure that you all felt that way in the past of like, not everybody wants to date somebody who talks about their dating life on a podcast or on social media. And I knew for a fact that I was shrinking my dating pool. Also just felt like really surely in my heart that there was going to be somebody who understood all it is that I do and who like really supported it. But there were times when that sureness wavered. And I think that, you know, most people don't have a dating podcast, but I think that there's things about each of us that we worry that somebody is never going to accept, and not only accept, but love.
What advice would you give to someone that's in that right now? That feeling of like, I've been burned so many times. I've been in all the situationships or the situations that don't go anywhere. How do I remain hopeful? I
think just reminding yourself that all of those things have taught you so much, not just about what you don't want, but also about what you do. Because even the, you know, situationship where you got burned, there are things you can learn about things you do want. You know, like there's always some things we can glean and take out of that. And you're always learning more about yourself. And you definitely don't want to still be in that. So I think reminding yourself that you've come so far and that you wouldn't want to be in those situations that you were in before, and building a life that you really love is going to lead to even more things that you really love, including, you know, if a long-term partnership is what you want, including that.
I think that's been my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation is just like tracking your growth. And we started off talking about the date trackers and really the nitty gritty that can help you see that. But every experience is building on it. And like I was saying earlier, like now I could look back and be like, oh, that relationship wasn't as serious as I thought, or that was a situationship. But in the moment, I didn't know that. I thought it was the be all end all and the person I was meant to be with. But I think with time, everything builds on each other and you learn what you truly want, what you need in a partnership. And all those experiences still very much served me. And I'm sure all of you that are listening too, and you've had the ones that don't work out, you can look back and be like, okay, while it wasn't ideal, it was still meant for me. Like that was meant to happen.
Yes.
And it helped me so much.
Yeah. And I think something that helps me a lot is to think about the places that I was at in my late 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, and how I am so happy that I met my partner when I did, when I had learned all of these things about me and about myself. Because if you had told me at like 23 that I was going to meet the person I'm going to marry at 37, I would have been sad.
Yeah.
Like, I would have been very sad to hear that information. But like, I don't think I could have had the relationship that I have now with him even 5 years ago.
Right.
No, it's such a good way to appreciate like where you are in timing, because I think it's so easy to be like, I'm behind and all of that.
Yes.
I'm also really glad that we were able to lay down the differences of, you know, dating versus situationship versus almost relationship. I think the reality too, and why I think we're in the era of situationship where everyone feels like that's what they're in, is that most dates don't work out.
Yes.
Like 99% of people are not going to be the right match. And we take it so personally. And I was so guilty of this, of like thinking that there's something wrong with us when it doesn't work out. But part of the dating experience is just to learn. And like these ones that we were talking about, that maybe they were more into it or you were more into it, or the person like realized they weren't ready for a relationship. It's not always malicious. They're not always stringing you along. Like, I get dating is personal, but we also have to like remove that a little too, and that it is a process for everyone.
Couldn't agree more.
My biggest takeaway from this conversation with you, Allie, is date for the growth, not for the stories. And I think a lot of times we do encounter daters who are like, oh, you got to hear my dating stories. I'm going to write a book about my dating stories. Now we have to just say, who cares? When my friends want to tell me about their funny dating stories, I'm like, I don't want to hear it. Tell me about growth. And I think what you just proved, because I was like, wow, she's really ballsy to have a podcast about her dating experiences. But you are collecting data for growth, and you were able, well, in Notion, to map out everything that you've learned, but also to see how far you've come. And that's something that we can normalize for 2025, is for everybody to just like look back at your dating career, because it has been a career.
Hell yeah.
The promotions that you've gotten and like the kind of the growth that you've gotten from it all, and what have you learned from it? Fuck the story. Yeah, we've all been on weird dates. We've all encountered strange, interesting, funny, hilarious people. Who cares? Like, track your growth, and that's what matters the most, because that's what's going to help you meet that person who's right for you, because that's when you're most ready, because you're like, you've validated your growth.
Yeah, cosign. Agree.
Cosign. If you were to leave our audience with one takeaway from this conversation, what would that be?
I think it would be to trust that you know what is right for you as it relates to dating advice, as it relates to how you're feeling about a situation. Obviously, there's like a lot of self-work to be done to gain, you know, to like lean into that trust for yourself. But I think we are so quick to judge ourselves on metrics that other people have put out. Like, I get so many questions in my AMAs about, you know, is it normal to go on one date a week? Or like, people want to know, how often do you and Skyline text? Or like, how often do you guys go out? And I know the reason that they're asking is because they want to benchmark for what's quote unquote normal. And I just wish that we could throw that out the window.
Yes.
And instead ask yourself if it feels right for you. And that goes for dating advice. That goes for the person that you're dating and how they make you feel. That goes for your friends, like all of it. Ask yourself if it feels right for you. And that is all that matters.
Cosign.
Double cosign. Awesome conversation. I just thought of you use moo for a mutual opt-out.
Yeah.
We can use moi for a mutual opt-in.
Ooh, I like that.
I like
Moi.
it.
It's a moi.
That's perfect.
All right. Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Allie. If people want to learn more about you and your podcast, where can they go?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am at Finding Mr. Height, Mr. MR, on TikTok and Instagram. My podcast is Finding Mr. Height, the podcast. And all of this is also findable at findingmrheight.com. Very consistent branding. Basically, that's everything.
I love it.
And we will link it all in the show notes too.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks to our listeners for joining us. And just remember, our book is out, How to Be Dateable. We talk about a lot of what we talked about in this conversation in the book, but then we give you a framework of how to gain clarity, how to get yourself into the mindset of someone who is about to meet their person. That person's right around the corner. Love is right around the corner for you. So pick up our book wherever books are sold. If you can find books, we're there.
Yeah, and it's so in line with what Allie said too, of finding the right relationship for you and the advice and doing it your way.
Yeah.
So again, all of that.
All right, we're going to wrap up this episode.
Stay dateable.